These days, the federal government is focusing a lot less on election modernization and a lot more on voter fraud. And one of the main men behind it all, Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach, has been fighting a legal battle about whether he has to discuss details of that document you see him holding there when he visited the president-elect in November, which includes proposed changes to the federal voting laws, including reportedly a proof of citizenship requirement. Today, a federal appeals court said he has to answer those questions, so we should learn more soon. And back here in Massachusetts, a push for same-day voter registration got a big boost recently when a Superior Court judge ruled the state's current registration deadline, that was 20 days before an election, was unconstitutional. So what's the way forward to make sure everyone has his or her say on Election Day? Joining me to discuss are Evan Falchuk. Evan ran as a third-party candidate for governor, now works at the Blue Lab. It's a startup aimed at recruiting and electing a new wave of Democrats. Good to see you, Evan. Carol Rose is the executive director of the Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts. Good to see you too, Carol. Very quickly, if you saw Christina Quinn's package, does this electronic voting thing make you nervous in this current environment or no?
Well, I mean, I think we all want to protect the right to vote, and if there's a way to do that where people still can fill in, but also that there's a confirmation, that it may be a situation where technology actually enhances democracy. So we shouldn't be anti-technology, but we need to be skeptical and kick the tires on it and make sure that it's going to actually not lead to any kind of voter fraud.
So you're Luddite or you're with her? Where are you?
Well, I'm worried about the Russians having hacked our most recent election, and until we can know that our systems are secure, I'd be reluctant to use more technology.
Okay, let's talk about something that I don't think the Russians have a position on, same-day registration. You were involved, obviously, intimately in this litigation that led to the 20-day waiting period being declared unconstitutional. That doesn't mean we'll have same-day registration. It just means that a 20-day waiting period is unconstitutional.
That's right, Jim. So the remedy that the ACLU was asking for in that case wasn't necessarily same-day voter registration. It's that 20 days is simply too long. That was a law that was put in, in the 1990s when it took days for our election officials to be able to process that. They don't need that kind of time anymore, and it's an arbitrary cutoff date, and that's what makes it unconstitutional.
What happens if the legislature doesn't do anything?
Well, it's unconstitutional to have a 20-day voter cutoff, so something's got to happen.
So we're just in limbo until... Do you both agree same-day registration is a good idea? You both do.
Yeah.
Charlie Baker on our radio show, Boston Public Radio, this is in all fairness, before the court decision, told Marjorie Egan and me it would be a really hard sell for me. Now, in fairness to Baker, he has not commented since the decision, so I don't know what his position is now. Make the hard sell to somebody who said to us, it's pretty easy to be voting right now, as is.
Well, people aren't voting. We've got low levels of voter participation. There are about 700,000 people in Massachusetts who are eligible to vote but aren't registered to vote. So if we had same-day or, better yet, automatic voter registration, we'd have a lot larger number of people ready to go and vote, which is one of the problems we have in our country today. So it's the responsibility of leaders to take on that challenge, not to say it's too hard to deal with.
You're nodding in agreement here?
Yeah, I mean, actually, what the trial showed was that there's somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 people in every of the last two elections in Massachusetts who would have voted but for the 20-day voter cutoff. So clearly there are people who want to vote, who want to participate, and especially first-time voters, it wouldn't occur to them that they can't vote before 20 days. So that's why it's clearly unconstitutional. Same-day voter registration is something that we have the technology, we have the capacity to do, and so we should do it and work as hard as we can to make sure everyone who wants to vote has a right to vote.
I should say, just to update people at home, the woman who defended the defendant, Secretary of State Bill Galvin, the Attorney General Maura Healey, says, I think the current law is constitutional, but I support same-day registration. She'd support, and Galvin told me here a couple of weeks ago, assuming the details were ironed out in a way that he found, he could support it too. So that may actually happen. Tell me, what's at the top of your list of items that you think would make voting easier for those who want to vote? What's the number one fix if you were the czarina of electioneering?
Now that the court has ruled that, in fact, a 20-day cutoff is unconstitutional, so we've had that important victory. I would say the next best thing we could do is to have same-day voter registration. It's doable, it's fair, it enables people to vote.
What's the next thing?
Well, beyond that, I mean, looking at what's going on across the country, which is Chris Kobach trying to, and Donald Trump, trying to use Chris Kobach to set up ways to prevent people from voting. The ACLU we're the lawyers in that case with Chris Kobach out in Kansas, but we're the lawyers in more than a dozen different voting rights cases across the country. Where increasingly we're seeing the Trump administration try to put in everything from requirements of various types of ID requirements or language requirements or various kinds of effectively poll taxes that would prevent people from voting.
But the good news is the Secretary of States themselves, virtually all of them, have resisted this data dump request that Kobach Kobach has made.
And including Bill Galvin here in
I know he
Massachusetts,
has.
who's done a great job. But we are up against the Trump machine that's trying to prevent people from voting, and that's probably the #1 ACLU priority right now.
What's at the top of your list? If you could make one change to make voting easier, more accessible, what is it?
Well, the things that have been mentioned, but also term limits. We need people to want to get out and vote. And when you don't have contested elections, which happens far too often, there's no reason to vote for a lot of people.
So what do you, I have this debate with my radio co-host Margery Egan practically every week, and I respond to her like I'll respond to you. So we'll term limit elected officials, and we'll allow lobbyists to serve permanently. I mean, lobbyists draft enough legislation now.
Right.
If it turns out you only have a limited period of time as elected official to develop a certain level of expertise, Gucci Gulch, as they call it,
right,
is going to be essentially writing the laws, are they not?
I think that's how it works today, is that Gucci Gulch writes these laws. So we've got to have competitive elections so people have a chance to participate. There's one thing that elected officials like, and that's being reelected. And so they don't want new voters participating. They don't want to see hundreds of thousands of new voters to come in and vote ways they don't know. So we've got to break that stranglehold of the existing political structures, elect new people, and create structures to make that possible.
And mail balloting, Oregon, all mail, I believe, Oregon, Colorado, Washington. Is there any reason not to be embracing this across the country? It seems to me if I could vote from my couch, it'd be even more likely I'd try to vote in every election that I'd vote. Is there any reason we shouldn't be doing that?
No, I'll defer to Evan on that
Is there
question.
anything that makes it easier? I like people all voting on the same day, although I'm a supporter of the early voting.
Early voting, by the way, which we implemented, in which every expert says increases voting zero, not at all. It makes it easier for people who are likely to vote anyway, but it doesn't increase participation.
We got to do anything we can to do this, and it should be the responsibility. And again, Bill Galvin did a good thing in resisting Chris Kobach, but he's dragged his feet on implementing these same-day and automatic voter registration.
Here's my let me just say the one thing that studies have shown, the one thing to increase voter participation, same-day voter registration, more than anything else that we could do.
Janie, one note right here. One last thing. Here's my favorite idea, and I can't claim credit. It was a guy on the Cape who unfortunately died before he got to put on the ballot. None of the above. Put an they have it in Nevada, even though it's not binding. So for all the frustrated people who say, I can't stand Hillary Clinton, I can't stand Donald Trump, they have a forum to register their disgust. You're a third-party candidate. There's not a third-party candidate. What's wrong with having that as an option on a ballot, even if it is not binding? How about if you went further? If none of the above gets 50%, nobody gets elected to do it all over again.
Right. Well, there's also ranked voting and really interesting things that people like Lana Guinier have proposed, and I think those are all worth looking at.
How about none of the above?
It's fine. Term limits would be better. It'd be so much better to have term limits so there could be an actual person to vote for. People are they've seen enough of voting against. Let's give them something to vote for.
So Ted Kennedy and John McCain, we could have done without them, right? Exactly. Thank you, Carol. It's great to see you.
Thanks so much.
Evan, it's great to see you. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time.